Alright everyone, we talked today first about Beijing Biden basically throwing the Fourth Amendment under the bus, along with all the other amendments that have been embattled by previous administrations as well as his. This is not unique to just Democrats, first and foremost, and certainly not unique to Biden. But this is taking it to an entirely new level. Link in the description, of course. You can read this story archived, of course. Always use archive.today. Remember, even if it's paywalled, you can always right-click the link, just copy it and throw it into archive.today. You don't even have to give them the fucking click. You don't have to go through a paywall anymore. That's like antiquated technology. First and foremost, though, there will be a pinned comment if you're watching this video on YouTube. Keep in mind, I make 4 videos a day. Today, I'll probably make a 5th because I have a literary update too. I put 2 videos every day just on these other 4 sites that'll be linked in that pinned comment. Now, this is something that I think 7 or 8 different people have tipped me off about in the last 24 hours, so that's big in people's minds. I can imagine why. For some time now, the government, well, the deep state, has been using private businesses, specifically those that control the modern public square, YouTube, Facebook, and so forth, to suppress the First Amendment, to go after political dissidents under the banner of fighting disinfo, fighting foreign election interference, fighting medical disinformation, fighting extremism and hate. All of these family-friendly terms, really they boil down to censorship, and really they're government-led efforts to squash out political and social dissidents on behalf of neoliberal globalism. That's what's happening. Now they're going after the right to privacy. See, the government, as is explained here, can't spy. Without a warrant, the government is very, very limited on the data they can collect on you. You have to put it out in public. Essentially, you have to put it out in the open. The government can't infiltrate a closed Facebook group and start gathering private messages and stuff like that. They can't do that legally without a warrant. Now, they do it anyway. Of course, we've had NSA spying, Project Echelon, stuff like that. At least the metadata of basically everything is captured 24/7 live nonstop. That being said, there are legal limits on how they can utilize and gather information. This is a big problem, says Uncle Sam, because there are extremists out there. People might be planning extremist activities. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll use groups that are private to gather this data. They can infiltrate it, and then they can just give us the data. Now, is this constitutional? Kinda, sorta, yes, and kinda, sorta, no. And here's the problem. The biggest problem with the Constitution is that when the founders incepted it, they didn't expect private institutions, I think, to ever have the monopolistic sort of power or the tools to be able to actually violate various amendments. This would be akin to what's happening online, where you see the First Amendment protects you against the government preventing you from saying certain things. So what do? The government partners with and works with and gives subsidies to and so forth private groups such as Google, such as Facebook Incorporated, Twitter, and all of these others, or even registrars to go after alt tech, by the way, that platform people that are being abused by these other sites. Now, I argue that that's unconstitutional. Government figures and government services such as NOAA alerts, USGS alerts, things of that nature, certainly the ability to communicate as a constituent with a politician, all of those things are platformed by these sites. They are not truly private, and they're all publicly traded as well, which opens up a total legal can of worms. The way it's treated, though, is that 230 basically is an empty suggestion at this point, and the government openly, you've had Klobuchar in the last couple of days asking people in Silicon Valley, well, what are you going to do more against disinfo? Basically what that means is, hey, I want you to censor people that I disagree with. That's basically what it boils down to. This is the same basic principle. This is an attempt to circumvent the protections of the Fourth Amendment, which protect you in your papers and person against unreasonable searches, which is what this is, and seizure of your data, in this case, arguably the latter as well. It protects you from that. But it doesn't protect you from a private group going in and gathering that data. Essentially, the government would, if Biden gets his way here, and there's no reason to believe that he won't, because there's a precedent for the government doing shady shit like this and basically cheapening and weakening the constitutional protections that led to Western civilization. What will end up happening is they'll use a number of third-party groups to go in, and those third-party groups will communicate with Facebook or with Apple or with Google or whatever and sweep up that data that otherwise the government couldn't touch, and then they'll give it to the government. Now, this is worrisome. It's constitutionally worrisome. It's ethically worrisome. It's legally worrisome. It should have everyone freaking out. There should be not a single U.S. citizen that supports this. To be clear, not a single citizen, and by the way, those that do, if Trump were to suggest such a thing, would be flipping out about fascism. They'll have no problem with it because they're stupid lemmings. They're morons. Here's the big problem. On the flip side, this is already happening. Even if Biden doesn't do this, have you heard of the Five Eyes? The United States already partners with UK and Swedish and other intel groups in the Western bloc of the world. And what you can do is the United States government can't spy on me. For instance, I'm a U.S. citizen. They can't spy directly on me without a warrant. But the British can. They can attempt to hack me or spy me because, again, I'm not protected under the UK's constitution. I'm not British. They can then give that data to the United States. Likewise, a British citizen, under normal circumstances, the UK government, there are loops and regulatory hurdles to go through and over before they can spy on a UK citizen. Well, less so, but they do exist. But there's nothing to say the US government can't do it. And so the U.S. government can spy on them seamlessly, especially if it's on a U.S. site, because it's easier to compel them because of legal reasons, and then give that data to the British. This data sharing is open. It's transparent. They admit to it openly. Well, it's already, in my opinion, for the government to be essentially outsourcing the violation of the Constitution to a private group or to a foreign entity. I would call that treasonous, actually. And it should be seen that way. None of these programs are technically legal under any reasonable interpretation of the Constitution. You've had similar attacks in other cases. You have, for instance, attacks on the Second Amendment using, well, this is a private area, so you can't have a gun here. Yeah, you have this property that you're renting or whatever, but under this contract we can prevent you from having a gun except under certain circumstances. The 10th Amendment. Look at what happened with the border. Back when Obama was president, you had people surging across the border, and some of the southern states said enough is enough. We're going to go to the southern border, and we're going to take care of the situation because the government is not actually enforcing its own immigration laws. And the federal government said, no, you can't do that. No, we control the border. So your southern border, even though it is technically a state border also, despite the 10th Amendment, falls under federal supremacy for our purposes. So you're not even allowed to help us enforce the law because we haven't asked you to do so. The rights of the accused. We now have a government. And this again, like Maxine Waters, these are government officials. These are taxpayer-funded people. I'm not talking about some private individual. That's meaningless. Or activistic groups that partner with and take money from or give money to government entities are denigrating the rights of the accused. Look at the Chauvin case. You had Maxine Waters coming out and saying that if we get the wrong verdict, we should riot in the streets, essentially. Of course, the MSM would very, very carefully not tailor it that way. They'd say, well, she's just talking about protesting. She's just talking about demonstrating if they don't get the result that they want. Literally intimidating a jury that at the time wasn't sequestered, which is going to lead possibly in the future to a mistrial, by the way. You've got this going on. So what amendments really are left? Basically, the troops can't be quartered in your home, and slavery's been abolished, and women can vote. And prohibition was repealed by another amendment. That's basically what's left. You certainly don't have equal rights. You have affirmative action. You have a million programs that violate the spirit of equal rights. You have differential hiring practices. You have differential admissions practices in publicly funded universities. All of these things blatantly violate the concept of these constitutional amendments, but they're outsourced in many cases to private or foreign entities. This should be patched up by a constitutional amendment. There should be a constitutional amendment making it clear that the basic premise of the protections of the Constitution preclude the federal or the state governments from outsourcing tyranny, from outsourcing unconstitutional abuse to private or foreign entities. That would solve the problem. Now, is it going to happen? No, absolutely not. Certainly not under the current administration. Like I said, my suggestion to libertarians, to populists and so forth is don't bother focusing on the federal elections. Ignore them for now. Not ignore them, certainly vote in them. Focus on the state houses. Focus on mayoral races. Focus on local legislative bodies, school boards, certainly housing authorities, things of that nature. Rip them apart. Rip their bureaucratic powers apart and reformulate them and use them as a tool to slowly reform the system from the foundation up. You have to build a foundation before you build the house. You don't build the house and then drill in underneath and say, oh, well, we forgot the basement. Oh, fuck it. No, then the house collapses. Well, collapsing the system won't do any good. Then you have civil war. There's a better way. It's just that it takes a little bit more time and effort and it's not quite as exciting at the outset. But that's what needs to happen. You need the Tea Party on steroids, essentially. but at the state level and at the municipal, local level. That's what you need. This sort of thing, if we continue allowing this to happen, and that's what's happening. The people have the ability to stop these sorts of things, but they're not speaking out enough. If we can prevent these things from happening, we can still have a republic. If we fail, within the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to have some real big fucking problems. The problem is each additional layer of surveillance, of speech control, of denigration of states' rights and so forth, makes it more likely that we have more and more problems in the future. Essentially, if you have like kids or you have like grandkids or something, you're basically throwing them under the bus and not doing your patriotic duty. Years ago, people used to go like town meetings and shit like that. Nobody does it anymore. Right in Texas, I think it was Fort Worth, a few days ago, the school board was taken over by people who now have basically banned the concept of woke teaching. The social justice bullshit curriculum that Biden wants is going to be tossed aside there. Why? Because for the first time, people got active and said, okay, enough is enough, and they showed up. It's not hard. How many people go to school meetings? How many people vote for the school board members? How many people vote for the local housing authority? Like, what's the turnout? 15, 20%? You have a responsibility, and you can do it. It's not actually that hard. Organize locally. It's possible. Take over the local systems of government and regulation. Tear the regulations apart. Fucking throw them out. And then start going after the state houses. That's how you do reform. That's a silent revolution from the bottom up. It's the only solution. It's the only way that we're going to solve things. Sitting there rambling on Twitter is unfortunately not going to accomplish very much, and this is unconstitutional, or at least under a proper interpretation of the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. Certainly the founders would say, yeah, but it's okay if the government hires a private group to go into your house and search through your papers without a warrant. That's okay, because they're not actually from the government. If you don't like it, you should build your own government or something like that. If you don't like it, you should hire your own private group to have a shootout with the people that the government sends to go and rifle through your garbage at night. Well, that's clearly not the intent of the Fourth Amendment, just as the intent of the First Amendment isn't, well, the government can't tell you what not to say, but any private group that owns the public square explicitly is perfectly acceptable for them to ban your soapbox. Never would have stood muster at the time. That's about all. Peace out.